Welcome to the Robert H. Jackson Center. My name is Kristen McMahon, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the center. And we're so glad that you could join us today for this celebration of trailblazing women in the legal field. Legends, if you will. We'd like to thank the Fenton History Center, the Chautauqua County Historical Society, and the town of Busti for their assistance with today's program. And we'd also like to thank the sponsors of today's event, Phillips Lytle and Chautauqua Abstract Company. All of our programs are free and open to the public, and if you'd like to learn more about Robert H. Jackson, the work of the Jackson Center, and how to support our mission, please visit our website, roberthjackson.org, or contact us directly. We appreciate your support. The genesis of today's program is Kate Stoneman, the first woman admitted to practice law in the state of New York and the first woman to graduate from Albany Law School. That's technically a designation that Robert H. Jackson did not achieve, even though he attended Albany Law School, because he was only 20 years old when he completed his studies, and you needed to be 21 to graduate from law school at the time. So his certificate of completion is in his stead. You'll learn more about Kate, a native of Busti, New York, in a few moments. And through today's program, we are contributing to the town of Busti's bicentennial celebrations. I've not seen any writings of Jackson's that really pertain to the rights of women. And I've been told by those who study Jackson deeply, it's because it would not have occurred to him that anyone would dispute the qualifications and importance of women. So instead, I draw inspiration from a 1951 speech that Jackson gave honoring learned and Augustus Hand, because I think all of the legends we will speak of today will recognize something of themselves in the language. I think that their attitude to the law and to the judicial office has been much more important than any cases they have argued, matters they have decided, or any opinions they have written. They believed in the law, and that does not mean that they thought everything that happened to be law is right or enduring. They have not regarded it as a closed body of learning, but they believed in the law as the foundation of the whole structure of an ordered and free society. First up, I would like to introduce Bonnie Kane Lockwood, Governor Hochul's Regional Director in Western New York, who will offer a few remarks on behalf of the governor.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here in this place of history, this place of such significance to not only the country, but to the world. And it happened here in Chautauqua County, and so much more history that I'm going to learn about today. So I'm really excited to be here and to also be part of that learning process. Joining me today is Karen Mahoney, our Director of Operations for Western New York region with Governor Kathy Hochul. It is really an honor to represent the governor, our first female governor, in a room full of inspiring and successful women and men, past, present, and future. And just a little bit about me, I worked for Congressman Brian Higgins for 16 years, and so got to know Chautauqua County during the time that he was representing here. In fact, he had a debate with one of his opponents right here as well. I retired 2 years ago and came out of retirement recently just for the opportunity to serve this historic governor, because I too wanted to be part of history. While Greg Peterson encouraged me to say that I'm related to Belva Lockwood, I cannot tell a lie. I'm related to the Lockwoods from the Perry Projects in the city of Buffalo through marriage, but through the courts. My uncle was James B. Kane, who was a Supreme Court Justice in New York. And most closely to my heart as I stand here today is thinking of my mother, who was a legal secretary for Hodson Russ before she went into the court system, and she worked for Judge John Dillon and then Judge Theodore Kassler. My mother was a graduate of Bryan Stratton, so nobody knew shorthand like her. Nobody knew grammar or punctuation like she did. Before there were computers and delete and insert, my mother could type up a paper for all of us. that would always get us an A+, and she said she deserved it more than we did. She was so proud to be part of a legal system. She was so proud to be part of history and the judges and the attorneys and the district attorneys that she came to know and respect so much. Joe Daniels once told me, "She will always be Mrs. Kane. She will always be Mrs. Kane." My mother was part of that history as well. So in April, to come out and represent this governor as part of Western New York, my mother, I think of my mother today, would be so proud. It is a privilege to work for this administration. From Seneca Falls to today, New York has always led the way in the fight for women's rights and gender equality. As the first woman elected governor of the state of New York, she has been and continues to be and will remain a forceful advocate for women's equality. Since taking office, the governor has enacted pioneering legislation to protect reproductive rights, announced the largest investment in child care in the state's history, signed into law landmark bills to empower survivors of sexual violence and harassment, passed a resolution to start the process of enshrining equal rights into the state constitution, and continues to work to close the gender wage gap. There's no doubt in my mind that New York State will continue, as it always has, always will be, lead the nation in the fight for women's rights, a fight that clearly is not over. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the women here today about the milestones and challenges that they overcame in their careers, and then passing your messages, your stories along to the governor, who, like so many of you in this room, and whose legacy we honor, is the first, but will not be the only, and will not be the last. So on behalf of Governor Hochul, thank you for including us and inviting us to be part of the program. Thank you.
To talk a little bit about the town of Busti, Norm Carlson, would you please join us at the podium?
Just going to give you a little context about Kate. Catherine Kate Stoneman was a remarkable woman, as we are soon to find out. She was part of a remarkable family. It included some remarkable women, especially remarkable for their time. Kate's grandmother, Rebecca Cheney Aldrich, 1773 to 1843, was among the very early landowners of what is now Lakewood. Her name, not her husband's, is on the Holland Land Company records for 1808 and 1809, which is prior to the date Uriah Bentley supposedly became the first settler in Lakewood. The 1808 entry says she will pay 5% within a year, and the 1809 says articled and deeded. So she apparently paid and bought one parcel, which was unusual in itself. Technically, married women could not legally own land in their name at that time in New York. So I don't know just what was going on, but Rebecca Cheney, under her maiden name, not her husband's, Nathan Aldrich, does appear to have been the first landowner in Lakewood. Kate's mother, Catherine Rebecca Aldrich Stoneman, 1800 to 1874, when a small girl walked miles across the ice, we are told, to attend school, a schoolhouse in Bemis Point, the first schoolhouse in the county. That's in the 1800s. At a time, education for girls had a much lower priority, and schools were not tax supported. Kate had a niece, Bertha Stoneman, 1866 to 1943, daughter of her brother Byron. Bertha was one of the first women to earn a PhD from Cornell University. She became a distinguished professor of botany in South Africa, a textbook author, and president of Huguenot University College in South Africa. She also founded the South African Federation of University Women. Many of the men in the family were also achievers. Her brother George Jr., as we all know, was a Civil War General and later Governor of California, and I'm certainly not going to take time to highlight all of his accomplishments here, but their father, George Sr., should also be remembered as a hardworking, inventive, successful man. Among other things, he built a sawmill in Lakewood, and he constructed a unique catamaran and treadmill horse-powered freight and passenger boat that chugged its way up and down Chautauqua Lake to take the lawyers to court, up to the courthouse from Jamestown in 1849, when there was no steam power on the lake. Numerous other men and women in Kate's generation and the following generation achieved in fields of science, education, law, politics, and other endeavors. It was definitely an achieving family.
Thank you, Norm. We also are fortunate to have a wonderful historian with us today who will share her research on Catherine Stoneman. Michelle Henry, please join me.
Thank you, and I do want to start by thanking and acknowledging B. Dolores Thompson, the former historian for the city of Jamestown, who did a lot of really early research on Kate Stoneman, and we built upon that when we were trying to learn more about her. So thank you, Dolores. Very early in the women's rights movement, Susan B. Anthony helped organize a convention at the county courthouse in Mayville. This was the day after Christmas in 1854. According to Anthony's diary, the courthouse was filled with an intelligent and attentive audience. There seemed an earnest seeking after the new truth. She indicated that 9 towns within the county were represented at the convention despite the unfavorable weather. We don't have a complete record of who was in attendance at the convention or the other lectures that Susan B. Anthony held in the county, but one local girl, Catherine Stoneman, if not in attendance, undoubtedly read newspaper accounts of the convention and later became a leader in state suffrage activities. Catherine was born in Busti in April of 1841. She was the 7th of 8 children of George and Catherine Stoneman. She described her parents as liberal-minded and supportive of her ambition for education. Both of her parents had been school teachers, and as Norman mentioned, her father was a farmer by trade, but was entrepreneurial and earned the moniker Commodore Stoneman for the catamaran that he built to navigate the lakes. Growing up on a farm without access to many books, Kate found herself reading and rereading a musty law book in her family's possession, partly because it interested her and partly because there was very little else to read. As a teenager of 14, when Susan B. Anthony lectured in Chautauqua County, Kate certainly would have read the newspaper accounts of Anthony's arguments for women's equality in the courts, education, and politics. Kate's older siblings were well educated and well established in their profession by the time she finished her education at the local common school. In 1855, just after Susan B. Anthony's visit to the county, one of her older brothers, John Thompson Stoneman, was admitted to the bar in Albany. He moved to McGregor, Iowa, where he later was to serve on the Superior Court in Cedar Rapids. Norman mentioned George Stoneman Jr., who had entered West Point in 1842, the year after Kate was born. His roommate was Stonewall Jackson, and his other classmates later formed the highest ranks of the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War, including George McClellan, George Pickett, and A.P. Hill. As chief of the Cavalry Corps, George's raids into North Carolina and Virginia inspired the song, "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down." He retired to California, where he was elected governor. In 1864, Kate left Busti to attend the state normal school at Albany, which is now the University of Albany. To support herself, she worked as a copyist for Joel Tiffany, a court reporter for the Court of Appeals. Her earlier years spent reading the law book in her family's possession apparently made her proficient at her job, for which she was paid 10 cents a page. After graduating in 1866, she began a career in education, eventually returning to the normal school to teach penmanship, drawing, and geography. At the time, these were the only subjects women were eligible to study or teach, others being considered too rigorous for a woman's delicate constitution. Many proponents at that time believed that a university education, which was different than the normal school education, would so sap a woman's strength as to render her sterile. Women who rebelled against Victorian ideas of domesticity risked being declared insane and committed to an asylum. This was usually done at a husband or father's request, and a woman had no right to contest or appeal her commitment. The cornerstone of Victorian psychiatry claimed that male dominance was therapeutic. A commonly prescribed treatment for an unmarried woman showing signs of hysteria was to find a husband. While teaching at the normal school, Stoneman was named executrix of her great-aunt's estate, which renewed her interest in the law and legal research. With assistance from attorney Worthington W. Frothingham, I'm not going to repeat that, an old friend in the Stoneman family, Kate settled the estate and was encouraged by him to further her interest in law. He offered her unlimited access to his extensive personal law library. In a 1916 interview with the Albany Knickerbocker Press, Kate said, "All the time I taught school, but during the summer and at night and over the weekends, I read law." Kate was also heavily involved in the suffrage activities in Albany, working to highlight the legal disabilities of women and the unequal and unjust laws existing in the statute books. Suffragists argued that as long as they had no voice in the law, they had no guarantee that privileges granted by one body of men would not be taken by another. Only with the right of suffrage would women have all the privileges and liberties that justly belong to a Republican citizen. In 1880, while Kate was serving as the secretary of the Albany County Women's Suffrage Society, a bill providing for the participation of women in school elections was passed in the state legislature. Kate considered this a milestone in the suffrage movement, and she was the first woman in Albany to place her vote under the new law. Once the bill was passed, the Suffrage Society in Albany began in earnest what today would be called lobbying. Stoneman recalled, "In those days, it was the simplest thing to get inside the brass rail. We had the run of the two houses and were allowed to come and go as we pleased." Stoneman was described as a prime mover and the core and center of suffrage agitation in Albany. In 1883, Kate filed a certificate as a law student in the office of Walter D. Frothingham, who had a law practice with his father, Worthington. Kate's friends encouraged her independent study of the law and her decision to take the bar exam. Stoneman took the exam in 1885, passing both the written and oral components. In the spring of 1886, she applied to the general term of Supreme Court in Albany for admission to the bar. Reviewers praised her work and recommended that she be admitted to practice. The court declined, however, basing its decision on two factors. There was no precedent for a woman to practice law, and a statutory provision required that every applicant for admission shall be a male citizen of the state. The legislature was currently in session, so Stoneman's suffragist friends used their influence to introduce a bill in the assembly that removed all disabilities for women in regard to the practice of law. Lillian Devereaux Blake, president of the State Suffrage Association, led the effort, and John Baker of Dutchess County fathered the bill. It passed the assembly but was rejected by the Senate and returned. It was reintroduced and the legislature passed the amendment on May 19, 1886. Governor David Hill signed the bill and an order was entered into the general term admitting Stoneman to practice. The Supreme Court decision is dated May 22, 1886, and it reads, "In the matter of the application of Kate Stoneman for admission as attorney and counsel, application denied. The opinion of J. Landon. The code being thereafter amended, the application was renewed and granted." Kate was 45 years old. Mr. Hamilton Wilcox, who was a champion of the suffrage movement in Albany and Washington, along with Mrs. Clemence Lozier and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all sent telegrams to Governor Hill thanking him for signing the bill. We weren't the first state to allow women to practice law. Phoebe Cousins was already practicing in Missouri, Myra Bradwell in Illinois, and Belva Lockwood in Washington, D.C., and she was the first woman to argue before the United States Supreme Court. News of Stoneman's admission to practice law was carried in newspapers across the country. One paper in Kentucky on May 24, 1886, announced, "New York's lady lawyer, Miss Kate Stoneman, admitted to the Empire Bar, the first woman to break down the barriers of prejudice. Sketch of the plucky lady's career and congratulations." It went on to state that the women suffragists of this city were greatly elated on receipt of the news, and Lillian Devereaux Blake observed that it was a harbinger of great victories to come, and Mrs. Clemence Lozier was confident that the dawn of a brighter day was at hand for poor and oppressed women. However, Kate didn't really devote all of her energy to establishing a new career in law. She continued to teach at the normal school and maintained her involvement in the suffrage and temperance movements. She also got involved in the establishment of the World Peace Organization. She advocated for the education of women. In 1887, she spoke to the senior class at Vassar College on the higher education of women. Her passion for the law and for advancing a place for women in the profession continued. Even though she had already passed the bar exam, Stoneman did not have a law degree. Perhaps to prove to herself and others that a woman could withstand the rigors of a law school education, in 1895 she entered Albany Law School. In 1898, 12 years after passing the bar exam, she became the school's first female graduate at the age of 57. Still, there's little evidence that she actively practiced law. She continued to teach with a career in education that spanned 40 years. In the 1916 Knickerbocker Press interview, it was written about Stoneman to have taken an active interest in the three greatest reforms within a century and to have seen them come to fruition is to have worked out a life history of more than ordinary significance. They were referring to the suffrage, temperance movements, and the world peace movement. Opening the profession of law for women surely should have been included as a fourth accomplishment. Kate Stoneman wasn't the only woman from Chautauqua County to have played a prominent role in her gender's advancement in the fields of law and politics. In 1918, Ellen Yates Miller of Mayville became the first woman in the state to be elected county clerk. She served 8 terms and at that time held public office longer than any other woman in New York State. In 1920, Gertrude Williams from the small town of Poland became the state's first woman to be elected to the position of town justice. With the largest political equality club in New York, Chautauqua County and its residents, both male and female, seemed eager to embrace women in these new roles. Stoneman lived to see the passage of the 18th Amendment prohibiting the sale and manufacture of alcohol, the passage of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote, and she saw another one of her life's passions realized with the birth of the League of Nations in 1919. Catherine Stoneman died on May 19, 1925 in Albany, and she's buried in Albany Rural Cemetery. A bronze plaque at her gravesite details her accomplishment in opening the profession of law for women in New York State. In 1994, Albany Law School celebrated the first Kate Stoneman Day, and in 2000 established a Kate Stoneman Visiting Professorship. In 2003, a historical marker honoring her was erected in her hometown of Busti. In 2009, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, New York. Kate's intelligence, her courage and tenacity, and what must have been just boundless energy paved the way for other women to enter fields of study and to pursue careers that were previously unavailable to them. She was a champion of human rights and of education and equality for all. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Kristen Lee Yao and Michael Panabianco to the podium. Kristen is the current president of the Jamestown Bar Association. Michael is the incoming president of the JBA. And we have some members of the audience we would like to recognize for their achievements and their trailblazing. Kristen?
Good afternoon. The presentation on Ms. Stoneman is quite interesting, and our Ladies of Legend doesn't end there locally. The Jamestown Bar Association has some of our own we'd like to recognize. It would be impossible to practice law in Chautauqua County without knowing the name Spoto. Josephine Spoto was the first female attorney admitted in Chautauqua County in 1930 and was also the first woman or female member of the JBA. She attended both the University at Buffalo Medical School as well as the University at Buffalo Law School, which she graduated from in 1928. We have here today her son, Doug Spoto, who was going to join me to discuss some of the legacy that was left by Josephine. Would you come up?
My mother lived until she was 98 and 11 months. She was the only child of an immigrant family to go to college and law school, along with my father. Same way, immigrant family, law school. What I did not remember, but I remembered when I heard it, was about Judge Jackson not being able to be admitted to the bar because he was 20 years old. My father was 20 years old when he graduated from UB, and so my mother, who was 1 year older, practiced law. She practiced law with an attorney from Faulkner by the name of Joseph Rice, and unfortunately, she never said anything about it. It was like nothing to my mother, to be honest with you, and I feel bad about that because of the historic being her the first woman lawyer practicing law, but she just raised a nice family, most of which are here today. We considered my mother a genius, and I think she was, and her genes followed myself, an attorney, my sister, an attorney, my nephew, an attorney, my three nephews, Shane, Tyler, and Sean Huber, attorneys, and lastly, my son, Mark, who is an attorney in Washington, D.C., and now involved with venture capital. But my mother was a unique woman, and we loved her dearly. Thank you.
She's also presumably the only legend that we're recognizing today that actually would have had the opportunity to know Justice Jackson personally, and spoke of that when visiting with Greg Peterson.
Tell me about Robert Jackson.
Well, the only time I ever really met him, it was at a dinner party given for the Italian consul.
Mm-hmm.
And he was my dinner partner.
Ah.
And we did the usual chit-chat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little nervous because, after all, he was quite a famous personality. And besides that, I was going to have to say a little something welcoming the other man. But during our talk, you know, he asked me if I was going to do trial work. And I says, I would love to do it, but I'm scared at the idea.
Mm-hmm.
He says, if you remember one thing, you'll never be afraid. I said, what the? You go in there with the truth, and you don't have to be afraid of anything. I never forgot that. But he was very pleasant,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a nice dinner. But that's, as I say, that's the only time I ever met the man or had anything to do with him.
What was your impression of him, just as an individual? He walks into the room. You'd seen pictures of him?
No, he didn't throw his weight around. He just sat there, and of course he was asked to say something, you know, but he didn't long-winded or anything like that. He was just very pleasant, just a short speech, and he was very nice to everybody around him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think everybody had the same idea that he was a very nice person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the only time I ever came across him. I never met him after that, anywhere.
Is there much talk about him in Jamestown when he was at Nuremberg or on the Supreme Court? Do you remember?
He was a very famous personality, and Jamestown had every right to be proud of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to me, he was a brilliant man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or he wouldn't have got as far as he did.
That's right.
You know. So I was very pleased to have at least known him for a short time.
Yeah.
All right, next on the next legend that we're discussing is Honorable Mary Schober. She has some family members in the audience today, who I'm sure many people here are aware of. Mary was the daughter of German immigrants. She was born in 1902 and passed away in June of 1980. Upon graduating from high school, where she attended St. Mary's Academy. She was the valedictorian there. Upon graduating, she worked for a local attorney in Dunkirk named Thomas Heffernan, who was very influential in her career. After Mr. Heffernan passed away, Ms. Schober studied for and passed the bar exam in 1950 after her first attempt, having not graduated or gone to college or to law school, which was certainly very impressive. She was the only female practicing attorney in Dunkirk until 1953, when she was elected the first female judge in the city of Dunkirk. And perhaps one of the interesting things that I read about was that she would often work on an informal pro bono basis for people who couldn't afford legal work. And she was often paid with fruits and vegetables and eggs and things of that sort. So the Honorable Mary Schober, the first female Dunkirk City Court judge, is the second legend.
Moving on, we have the first female confidential law clerk in Chautauqua County, which was Cynthia Peterson, who's with us today. She's an honors graduate of both Allegheny College and the State University of New York at Buffalo, and was admitted to practice in 1979. Thereafter, she took the confidential law clerk position, where she worked with Judge Willard Cass and also Judge Lee Town. There was an article written by a Jim Fox that announced to the community that the judges had hired a pretty lawyer. And they all found that quite remarkable, and also mentioned that she was married to a local attorney known by Frank Peterson. So they were also very impressed by her husband. She entered private practice and was the first female to hold numerous positions throughout her career. First as a partner at Wright and Hampton, and subsequently has worked as in-house general counsel to numerous corporations. In 1989, she became the first female president of the Jamestown Bar Association, and currently serves as president and CEO of a family-owned corporation, Howard Industries. She's also a member of the Board of Governors of the Society of Chemical Manufacturers and Affiliates, and is married to one Greg Peterson, with whom she has 3 children and 5 grandchildren.
Next, I'm proud to present Betsy Steger, who's in the audience today. Betsy was the first female Chautauqua County attorney. She graduated from SUNY Fredonia and was a member of the Capital University School of Law class of 1982. She's admitted to practice in both Ohio and New York State. She served as the acting commissioner and then as the social services attorney for the county from 1992 until her retirement in 2015. A couple of notable things she did in that capacity was she was part of a team that started the Chautauqua County Strengthening Families Initiative, which provided a new approach to non-custodial parents paying child support. She served as a county representative on the Family Treatment Court, Integrated Domestic Violence Court, as well as the Family Court. And she developed protocols and memorandums of understanding between the courts, between DSS, and the court-appointed special advocates. She also developed and monitored the court liaison position. So as I said, Betsy's been retired since 2015, and what she enjoys most of all since her retirement is travel. Interestingly, most recently, she's traveled to Antarctica and to Rome, which I thought was pretty interesting. So that's Betsy Steger.
Our next legend, while I was doing my homework and research, I figured that she was probably working with Betsy on a lot of those directives, but it's our own Honorable Judge Claire, who was elected the first female Chautauqua County Family Court judge in 1998. Originally from New England and married to another local attorney, Robert Van Every. She's a University at Buffalo grad and had originally considered a career in social work, which I thought made a lot of sense considering the impact that she made and the roles that she held. She was the first elected female Chautauqua County Family Court judge in 1998, but even more impressive is that she was the only family court judge in the county for 16 years of her time on the bench, and on average she handled about 6,000 cases a year in that role. In 2012, she was the recipient of the Howard A. Levine Award for Excellence in Juvenile Justice and Child Welfare. The award, which is given by the Committee on Children and the Law of New York State Bar Association, recognizes individuals for their work protecting and promoting the rights of New York's children. Before becoming the county's family court judge in 1998, Judge Claire worked for the New York State Health Planning Commission, the Mental Health Information Service Appellate Division, and for 20 years in her private practice conducting trial work and spending much time in family court. She currently serves on the New York State Family Court Advisory and Rules Committee and on the Board of Trustees at Chautauqua Institution. And it's my understanding she may be joining our panel today.
Next, and unfortunately, she was unable to. Oh, okay. Thanks for being here, Judge. So next is the Honorable Maureen Skerda. Judge Skerda is the first female judge in Pennsylvania's 37th Judicial District. She practiced law in Warren and Forest Counties since 1988. She was a staff attorney at Northwest Legal Services, an assistant district attorney, and finally a court hearing officer from 1992 through 2005. As I said, in 2006, she became the first female judge of the 37th Judicial District in Pennsylvania. She's a respected leader in her role, and eventually she became the 26th presiding judge on January 1st, 2010. So she oversees the administration of all the court departments. An interesting part of the judge's resume is that she's a member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, the Pennsylvania State Conference of Trial Judges, and the Juvenile Court Judge Commission. She participates in the regional and local leadership roundtables of the Autism Committee on Juvenile Dependency Issues, through which she initiated a local treatment court and services for a newly created Pennsylvania Supreme Court task force focusing on issues affecting justice-involved individuals with autism and other intellectual disabilities. The judge is very active, obviously, in the community and serves on a number of civic and professional boards, and we're very happy to have her here today.
I think it's important to note that this is not an exhaustive list. We have other women that have served in capacities that they were the first, but our most recent female first is in 2021. We had the Honorable Grace Hanlon elected as the first female Chautauqua County Supreme Court judge. She's also the first Chautauqua County Supreme Court judge seated from Chautauqua County since 2002. Judge Hanlon is the youngest of 10 children, a graduate of the University at Buffalo and Pace University Law. She interestingly did a semester of, I'm hoping it was law school, at the University of London, where she was an intern for one of only 500 female barristers at the time. Admitted to practice in New York in 1990. She worked with the Chautauqua County District Attorney for 13 years before joining Pheasant and Laumer and D'Angelo, where she eventually became partner. Her practice focused in criminal court matters, civil litigation, and family court matters. 2005, she returned to the district attorney's office until she was hired as principal law clerk to County Court Judge John T. Ward and was retained by the Honorable David W. Foley. In 2021, Judge Hanlon was elected the first female Chautauqua County Supreme Court judge, and, in 2015, received the Outstanding Woman in Law Award by the 8th Judicial District Gender and Racial Fairness Committee, and in 2022, the Legal Excellence Award from the Daily Record and the Rochester Business Journal. She lives with her wife, and I hear that she has most recently acquired a motorized golf cart that she enjoys in her spare time. And that is our Judge Hanlon.
Could I ask all of our ladies of legend in the audience to please stand for one more round of applause? Thank you.
It's really exciting. It must be. I mean, just the opportunity to have so much talent in one place, one time, and the nice thing, there's an awful lot of people watching this right now. So aside from those here, there's a virtual degree of excitement of having a chance to pause and reflect on the ladies of legend. And I'm delighted my wife being acknowledged as one of them, because she reminds me of such often. One of the inspirations for today's event, which I'm delighted that Robert Jackson Center has paused to do this, was the Honorable Stephen Cass. And as just a point of introduction, he's going to introduce the panelists today as well as the moderator. And I'm delighted that Judge Cass could do that, but a little bit about him for the camera, though many know him, you can't walk into a room and not know him. He's a presence, he's an omnipresence like no other. He's extraordinary. But a little bit about him. He's the surrogate for the Chautauqua County Surrogates Court in the 8th Judicial District of New York. He was appointed to the Surrogate Court by the former Governor George Pataki in 1999 and was subsequently elected to a seat in 2000 and then reelected in 2010. He was also appointed in 2002 to serve as the acting justice of the Chautauqua County Supreme Court by the Honorable Jonathan Lippman, former chief administrative judge of the state of New York. Upon his appointment to the Surrogate Court, he filled the vacancy created by the retirement of his father, the Honorable Willard W. Cass, who my wife had the opportunity to be one of the first law clerk. Most importantly in Judge Cass's resume is the fact he graduated from Allegheny College, where I did, and Cindy also. And he also was of an appropriate age where, unlike Robert Jackson, he could get a degree from Albany Law School. And so his resume is long and varied, and we're not here to necessarily honor Judge Cass except to acknowledge him. I'll ask him to come forward at this time. Judge Cass.
Well, thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thank you so much for all coming. This is such an important day that we're able to recognize our honorees and our panelists. And it's kind of fun if you think about it. You know, Margaret Thatcher said, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. Right? So here I am speaking, admiring all of you ladies who are the doers that have made these things happen. And before I begin to introduce the panelists, I'd like to say this. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your tenacity. Thank you for your success. Because your success is our success. That's what it's really all about. We're in this together. And also from Sandra Day O'Connor, she used to say quite a bit, it's good to be the first, but you don't want to be the last. The first person that I'm going to introduce, unfortunately, couldn't be here today, but I want to just recognize her briefly. She's really a trailblazer in the legal profession. That's Maryann Saccomando Freedman. She was actually born and raised in Buffalo, New York, attended Grover Cleveland High School, earned her JD from the University of Buffalo Law School. Think of this. When she graduated in 1958, she was one of 3 in her class of 100. Yesterday I had a trial and some people were in the jury room admiring the composites, and they couldn't believe that way back in time there were no women lawyers. And they actually found one in 1957 and remarked how they have progressed over time, just looking at the composites to today, where it's almost 50%. But Maryann Saccomando Freedman, she was in private practice at Freedman in Buffalo. In government service, she worked for the Buffalo City Court. She was an assistant attorney general for the state of New York and clerk for the New York State Supreme Court Justice William Ostrowski. She was a professor at the Erie Community College, a guest lecturer at the University of Buffalo Law School. The 2 big things that she did was in 1981, she became the first female president of the Erie County Bar Association. And then most importantly, in 1987, she was elected to be the president of the New York State Bar Association. So she was the first woman or female Bar Association president. Her membership in the legal and civic community and organizations are really too numerous to list for this entire discussion. Her resume is like 4 pages, just to give you an idea of what she means to the community here and in Erie County. They've created a musical, and they're going to have a musical about her that opens, I think, June 3rd in Buffalo. She's quite a lady. I want to just read a couple things that really set her apart. She says, breaking a gender barrier was not easy. She told a reporter how she had to pay close attention to all aspects of her life, from her words to her appearance. I say this because one time I interviewed Judith Claire and she's shaking her head and she says, oh my gosh, I remember those things when I would interview with the firm and the questions that they asked me. What happens if your husband has a cold? Who's going to take care of him? What about the children? Things like that. Just incredible that you wouldn't even think that we would have that happen such a short time ago. But here's what she said. The burden I felt was always on. I was always exposed. I was always being assessed. I had to be conscious of what I was doing and how I was doing it. She said, because I was always on stage, I was in the public eye. I had to look right. My hair had to be combed. I had to have makeup on. You shouldn't have to worry about that, but I did because I was always on. I was always on stage. She knew that she was representing more than just herself. If I couldn't do it, nobody could, and if I could do it, anybody could. That's these ladies that we're honoring today. So Maryann Saccomando Freedman, I made this little note, which all applies to all these ladies. Do it, be it. So at this time, we have a short video clip since Maryann Saccomando Freedman was unable to attend.
Maryann Saccomando Freedman to come up. Maryann is from Buffalo. She's been engaged in the practice of law since 1959. Ms. Freedman was the first woman to become president of the Erie County Bar Association up in Erie County, New York. And by the way, Maryann, you're joined because Cynthia Peterson was the first woman to be the Jamestown Bar Association president, and she's here tonight too. Maryann went on and became the New York State Bar Association's first female president in 1987 and 88. She's held numerous leadership positions in civic and professional organizations. She's a graduate of the University of Buffalo, and she now practices law with the firm Cohen and Lombardo. And she also was former president of the New York State Bar Foundation in Albany, and I'd like to call on her for a few remarks right now. Maryann.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kidder. And I'd like to also thank Greg Peterson for doing such a wonderful job with the Jackson Center. I was reminiscing, and I was here in Jamestown approximately 6 or 7 years ago to make a similar grant to one of the legal services programs. That is one of the pro bono legal services programs. And at that time, some of the lawyers talked to me about this dream of building the Jackson Center. And I thought it was a wonderful thing, but I thought it was probably just a dream. And boy, when I got here tonight, was I taken back on my heels, because this is a glorious dream come true, and thank you for doing it. The New York State Bar Foundation, as one might imagine, gets hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications in its 2 grant cycles during the course of the year. We clearly can't give monies, award monies to all of those applications and all of those people, all of whom are worthy. They're all worthy projects. So we look very carefully at what it is we're being asked to fund, what the benefit to our society is, how wisely the money will be used, and whether it is a program that can extend throughout the state. When we received the Jackson Center application, which we reviewed in January of this year for assistance in this program, we were all very, very impressed. It met every one of those criteria. But I must tell you that being here tonight, I'm even more impressed, and I can't wait to go tell our board what a really wise decision they made in giving this grant to this program. To have the quality of the young students that are here tonight taking an interest in learning about some major legal important principles of our nation and what we stand for is something that is not to be measured. It is immeasurable. And I congratulate each of them. And I especially would also like to congratulate the writer of the book, whom you have reviewed. In the past season at Theater of Youth in Buffalo, some of you may know Theater of Youth, there was a dramatization of a play production of the book, Number the Stars. I took 2 of my grandchildren and my daughter to see that, never dreaming that I would actually be in the presence of its author. And I'll tell you, it was cause for a great deal of sober discussion on the way home. And those boys are 9 years old, so I can imagine how much more it means to you 6th graders and how much more insight you have into the story. And thank you for giving that to us. Having said all that, I would like to present a check from the New York State Bar Foundation in the amount of $5,000 payable to the Robert H. Jackson Center, Inc. for this program.
Just before we started, I was visiting with Tori Ergang, and she said, it's so important that Greg Peterson does those videos and archives them so we're able to bring these back to life and visit with these people again. Thank you for doing that. Our next panelist has the title of the United States Attorney for the Western District for the State of New York. Trini Ross, would you please stand? Thank you. It's an honor, thank you. It's an honor that she can be here. She was nominated by President Joseph Biden Jr. on July 26, 2021, and unanimously confirmed by the Senate on September 30th, 2021, becoming the first black woman to hold the position in the Western District of New York State. 2021, hard to believe to break the glass ceiling, isn't it? President Biden signed her commission on October 5th, 2021, as the top law enforcement official in the district. She's responsible for overseeing the prosecution of federal criminal cases brought within the 17 counties of the Western District of New York State. The office also represents the United States in all civil matters brought within its territory. On March 30th, 2022, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced the appointment of Ms. Ross to serve on the Attorney General's Advisory Committee of the U.S. Attorneys, another first for Ms. Ross. In addition, she was selected as the chairperson for the Attorney General's Advisory Committee on Law Enforcement Coordination, Victim Assistance, Community Relations as well. In this role, she'll lead the subcommittee that will advise Attorney General Garland on matters involving law enforcement, victim assistance, community relations, another first. By way of background, she's a native of Buffalo, New York. She received her Juris Doctorates cum laude from the State University of New York, Buffalo Law School in 1992, her master's from Rutgers in 1990, and her BA from the university in 1988. She most recently had served as Director of Investigation, Legal Division with the National Science Foundation Office of the Inspector General since 2018. She's also an adjunct professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo Law School since 2006. She began her career as an appellate court attorney for the New York State Supreme Court from 1992 to 1999, I have here. When I visited with her yesterday on the telephone, I said, "You have an incredible resume. What you do for our society is so important. What's your proudest accomplishment?" And here's what she said. She said, "I raised 4 children while attending college, while getting her graduate degree, while attending law school. And, mind you, they are the proudest they are all productive members of society. So here's a lady who's done everything. She brings it right back to home and what she takes care of." And I said, "Well, Ms. Ross, what about this? You were this, you did this, you did this." She said, "It's not about me. It's about us." She said, "You can set the tone from the top, but we all march together." And that's really, again, the common theme. Their success is our success. So thank you, Attorney, United States Attorney, Attorney Ross. Thank you very much. And I'm not going to really get a chance to introduce your speaker, but she has a similar background where she took care of her kids while she was attending school at night. She graduated from law school and then clerked to become an attorney and pass the bar. She's one of the last ones in our county that actually did 1 year of law school. But the same thing with Kristen Lee Yaw. She took care of her family first. Our last panelist, and she bears the title of the Chief United States District Judge of the United States District Court for the Western District of New York. That's amazing if you think about it. Elizabeth Wolford was born in Buffalo but moved to Rochester early on in her childhood. She earned her bachelor's degree from Colgate University in 1989 and then got her law degree in 1992 from Notre Dame. In private practice, she worked with the Wolford law firm where she worked with her dad and her brother, and she served as the president of the Greater Rochester Association for Women Attorneys from 2003 to 2004. She was also the president of the foundation of the Monroe County Bar from 2010 to 2012. She has an incredible resume as well. But I would note that Senator Charles Schumer stated, "Judge Elizabeth Wolford is a capable, brilliant jurist, and I'm thrilled she's been selected to be our new chief judge, breaking another glass ceiling in the Western District of New York. President Barack Obama nominated her to serve as the United States District Judge of the United States District Court for the Western District in 2012. She received her judicial commission on December 17, 2013, and then later became the chief judge on July 14, 2021. So she has two firsts. First, female district court judge, and now the first female chief judge for the Western District of the state of New York. Following Judge Wolford's lead, this is crazy now, all of the federal district courts, north, south, east, west, all are led by a female chief judge. Proudest accomplishment, and it goes right back to what these ladies do, and that is they care about you. She said, my proudest accomplishment is working hard because I care about you and making sure that justice is served in your home. How about that? Here's somebody who's way up high who cares about each and every one of us. I love this story about Judge Wolford because this really captures her spirit. She was in Washington, D.C. at the National Mall, and they were sightseeing the White House with her two young nieces. And there was a White House, and Judge Wolford said, ladies, maybe someday you'll live there. And they looked, and I can just see Aunt Liz. You think we'll marry the president someday? And she said, no, maybe someday you'll be the president. The moral of the story is this, and she goes on to say this, you can tell kids as much as they want. They can grow up and they can be anything that they want, and you can tell them that. But until they've seen somebody that looks like them, that's actually serving in that role, it's difficult for them to actually envision it. So once again, their success is our success. And they all do the same thing. They do it, they be it. Thank you.
So if I could invite Judge Wolford, Trini, and Judge Claire, if you would join us as well to the table, please. And Kristen, in your moderator role. Thank you.
They asked me to discuss with you all being women in the positions that you're in, and I'm really just kind of curious if law was your first career choice, and if not, what was? And why, what, and who moved you in the direction of the law? And if you would start for me.
Sure. Well, clearly I was influenced by my father, who was a practicing attorney, and growing up, he'd always come home and tell stories about his cases, and he always made it sound so interesting, and that definitely influenced me. But I loved writing as well, and I was on the high school newspaper, I was on the college newspaper, and so what I wanted to do was go into journalism and be a newspaper reporter. And my father heavily influenced me to at least get a law degree and see, you can always, after a law degree, decide to go into something else other than the practice of law. And given the state of our newspapers today, which unfortunately aren't quite as robust as they used to be, I'm happy I made that decision.
Thank you. And Trini, how about you?
No, I did not want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an engineer. I went to high school. I got my high school diploma in electrical technology. I started in college as an engineering major, and then something happened. I went off the rails. Decided I wanted to be a professor, so I went to graduate school, and I got a master's degree in criminal justice. It was supposed to be a PhD, but after being there, I realized that wasn't hands-on enough. And I was talking to my best friend from high school, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he's like, I'm going to law school. I was like, really? Where are you going? He said, University of Buffalo. I didn't even know Buffalo had a law school. And so I said, well, I have a family, I have children and a husband. I want to come back to Buffalo. And so I'm going to law school as well. And so I did. Never expecting that I would practice law, but just something to do.
Did you have a general interest prior to that conversation, or it just
No. No, I don't even know that I knew any lawyers, though I knew Mrs. Freedman because her son and I were high school classmates. He was also an engineering, electrical technology major at Hutch Tech, and he went on to be an engineer. I come from pretty much a family of engineers. My brother has his computer engineering degree from RIT. My son has a computer science degree from University of Buffalo. My husband has industrial technology degree from Buffalo State, so I'm the outlier.
And Judge Claire, I had referenced earlier that you had a prior desire and then ended up in law. Could you tell us a little about that?
I was going to go into social work, as you said, and after I graduated from college, I had a job as a social worker in the Rath building, which had just opened up. It was the first time I met any lawyers. I didn't know any lawyers growing up. And I very quickly discovered that social workers had their hands tied in what they could accomplish, and that it always seemed that if we wanted to get something done, we turned to the lawyers. So I was applying to graduate school because I had graduated early, so I applied in social work and law, and I said I would go to whichever one I heard from first, and I heard from law school first.
Excellent. What was the biggest hurdle or the hardest to know that you experienced in your career, and how'd you overcome it, and what did you take away from it? You want to start from again?
I'll start again. I found one of the more difficult challenges I found when I first started practicing is having the respect, at least that I thought I deserved at that point. Maybe I didn't deserve it, but in terms of dealing with opposing counsel or dealing with appearing in court, as a young female attorney, I just felt as though I had some hurdles to overcome. I remember, I've told this story before, I remember appearing for a deposition at a law firm, and I showed up with my trial bag all filled with documents ready to ask the witness questions, and it was actually the receptionist who thought I was a court reporter, and it was ready to set me up to take transcription down for the deposition. And I remember a particularly difficult, because I practiced civil litigation, and so a lot of what I did was a lot of depositions, and I remember a particularly difficult one where the attorney, he was an older gentleman, he was a bully, and he pushed me around and did so in front of my client, and the challenge I found was, how do you deal with that? How do you maintain your true self, and you want to be yourself, but you want to push back, and I found that very challenging. As a young attorney, I struggled with that. I finally figured it out, but it took some time, and it required me becoming older, I think, as well.
Was there anything that you adopted as far as practices or preparation strategies to counteract that? Trying
to not react. It's difficult sometimes in litigation. It's very easy to, I hate to use this word, especially with women, but to react emotionally and to strike out. And I found that it was much more effective if I took a breath and then contemplated how I was going to respond. And I think it was in part realizing, and it may not be politically correct to say this, but the reality is that women have to think about how they react differently than men sometimes. And it's just, especially in front of a jury. I mean, people have preconceived notions as to what is appropriate for your particular gender and how to react. And so I think it was kind of finding my sea legs, so to speak, and figuring out what is an effective way of dealing with this, and working hard, and knowing that I was going to work harder than anybody else on the opposite side of a case so that I would know the facts better.
So summarizing, you feel like the biggest hurdle you've faced is being the woman walking into the room of men?
Sure, yeah. And I can't imagine what it was like to be some of the women practicing who we've highlighted here today, because I thought it was difficult, and I started practicing in the early 1990s. I can't imagine the challenges that they face. I mean, the reason I'm sitting here, we're sitting here today, is because of women like that who were so courageous.
Agree entirely. Ms. Ross, could you tell me what you think your biggest hurdle or your loudest no was through in your career?
I clerked for the Appellate Division, 4th Department. It was actually 1992 to 1994, and that's a great way to start a career as a clerk. And I thought after that I could get any job I wanted, and the job I wanted was to work for a defense attorney. I wanted to be a defense attorney. And it was no after no after no after no of each application that I sent to the various defense attorneys in the city of Buffalo. And that was a hard no, because then again I had to regroup and think about what I wanted to do if I could not do what I thought I was going to do. And I went to a private law firm for about a year practicing commercial litigation, which was interesting and eye-opening in many ways, and I decided that was not my lifelong dream. I wasn't getting out of it what I was putting into it. How could I make a difference in society if I couldn't be a defense attorney? So I did research, and I realized by being an assistant United States attorney, I could do that. I could have a broader impact rather than representing one individual at a time, which is what I had hoped to do. I could actually make sure that the system was fair and working for all in a bigger systematic way. So that was hard no's for me not to be able to be a defense attorney, but sometimes the hard no's are the good no's.
That was kind of what I was going with in the question, as far as like, what did you take away from the no's of the defense attorney? So it was finding another avenue to do the same, affect the same change.
Or even more. In my career, for about 23 and a half years, I was an assistant United States attorney, and I was able to, I think, bring some, and one of the first Black attorneys in the office, honestly, to bring a different perspective, a different lens of looking at the people we were charging with violating crimes, why they would be there, their family, their background, their perspective as well. That was very important to me, why we should have diversity on the juries, which Judge Wolford is quite passionate about. And it's very important, but I was able to bring that perspective to an office that didn't have anyone to bring that perspective, and that was just generally. Even more broadly, I was able to do things that I don't think people expected from someone who looked like me. Like, I handle very complex white-collar cases. I ran the mortgage fraud task force back in the early 90s after the financial fallout. I ran the human trafficking task force and have been able to help survivors of human trafficking get their lives back and get their voices back. And I've pretty much done it all because I'm very interested in the next thing and the next thing. But I think people were surprised, like Judge Wolford was saying when I showed up. The first thing they did was underestimate me, which was my superpower. After a few times of underestimating me, I lost my superpower because then they knew I was prepared and I was basically there to get the job done. But those few moments were always fun, very much so.
And Judge Claire, your hardest no, biggest challenge?
Well, I'll stick with the theme, I guess. I think in many ways, finding that first job, which was just so challenging back then. I've told, most of these stories before, but when I started law school, we were still at the old law school downtown in Buffalo, and our class was the first class that was considered to have a lot of women. There weren't very many of us, but we were a lot by the day's standards. So we were not allowed to use the student lounge because the sight of women apparently in the student lounge would cause male law students to lose control. This is what we were actually told. And so we had to use the women's bathroom for our lounge, and there were about 25 of us in the class, and the bathroom held one pink cracked two-seater love seat, and that was our student lounge. But when we started applying for jobs, we used to meet for lunch and swap stories, and it wasn't illegal to discriminate. So we were asked what would happen if we got married, if we got pregnant, what kind of clothes we would wear if we were hired, what kind of birth control we used, and the question that Judge Cass quoted earlier, yes, indeed, I was asked what I would do if my husband was homesick with a cold, if they hired me. So yeah, we were terrified.
How did you answer the question?
You know, I wanted so much to say, well, I understand that men are fragile, and if they have a cold, you know, they really do need to be cared for. But I didn't think that was a good idea, so I didn't.
I heard recently you always get better when you work with people who are excellent. And I know definitely firsthand that to be true. So I'm curious, who are your significant people? Were they attorneys? Were they colleagues? Who's your most significant coworker that left an impact on both the way that you practice, the way that you handle things, and your career as a whole?
Starting with me again?
You're closest to me, I like it that way.
I mean, it's boring to say it, but it's my father, because I practiced with him for over 20 years, and he taught me everything, really, I know about practicing law. Not to diminish my mother's role. She was a biology teacher, and she helped get me through school, and was very, very firm that it was important to study hard. But my father was clearly the biggest influence in terms of learning what it is to be a good litigator, how to be a good lawyer, how to be a good member of the legal community, and how to relate to other members of the legal community. But again, relating back to what I said previously, I also had to find my own way, because my father, now he's 81 years old, white male, that's different than my temperament and my means of, it's different than me. And so I had to find my own way in terms of how to accomplish my objectives, but do it in my way.
Did he have any sayings that he lived by or that he imposed on you when it came to the practice of law, or just running a practice or anything?
Never to go into court unprepared. I mean, that was clearly his. He had been actually an assistant U.S. attorney in Rochester under Judge Burke, who is a very well-known federal judge who was in Rochester for, I don't know the dates off the top of my head, but and he was notorious for being difficult to practice in front of. And he taught my father, who then taught me, that you never go into court unprepared. And I've lived by that to this day. Even as a judge, I don't go into court unprepared.
Over-prepare, right?
Over-prepared. You know, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to spend a lot of time.
Attorney Ross, do you have someone that you've worked with that you would consider that excellent, that gave you something to carry forward?
Yes, and she was the first, Judge Dolores Denman, who hired me for the appellate division, 4th Department. I think I was the first or the second black attorney who worked there, and she hired me. She had newly become the chief judge there, and I remember so many things about her, so many lessons, her preparedness, her ability, her poise, her just good-naturedness, making sure we all succeeded, everyone she hired to be a law clerk there. And then one day she brought Justice K, Judith K, around, who was the first female for chief judge of the Court of Appeals. And this was the most amazing thing I saw. Justice Dimon is bringing Justice K around to meet us law clerks, and Justice K is carrying her jacket, sewing a button on while she's talking to us. Like, it was the most amazing thing I have ever seen, how she could sew a button. I could barely sew a button, so that's part of probably why it was amazing. But those two women together set the standard as far as I was concerned. If I could be 3/4 of the attorney and the women that they were, then I was doing okay.
Excellent, thank you. And Judge Claire, who are your people of excellence?
I'd say my husband, Robert Van Every, and there are two judges who mean the world to me that way. I just feel emotional thinking about it. Judge Willard and Judge Gerasi, who Judge Cass's father was the most supportive person to me when I was starting out. I remember once the babysitter canceled on me and I came to court with the kids and he didn't bat an eyelash. This was at a time when people mistook me for a secretary or made fun of what I was wearing. And he just acted like it was another day. He couldn't have been more supportive and gave each of the kids a lollipop because he did adoptions, so he had them on hand, and encouraged me always and always. I learned so much from observing him and from Judge Gerasi, who I just can't say enough good things about.
Very nice. Was there, I'm going to stay with you, Judge Claire. Was there a conversation or a moment where you decided to try, or did someone like grant you permission, if you will, to reach beyond what you previously saw was your limit, to get out of to go beyond that comfort zone?
Well, certainly running for judge was well beyond my comfort zone. You know, people always ask me now, did I always want to be a judge? And I never thought about being a judge, ever. And I wouldn't have thought of it, I suppose. Ted Smith, who I didn't know that well, and I don't know if people here remember Ted, had asked me to go to lunch with him one day and asked me if I ever thought about running. I had never considered it. And so no, it isn't that I wanted to be a judge, and I wouldn't have if he hadn't asked. And I know my family thought I was crazy. I think everyone thought I was crazy when I ran. So that's probably about the best I can answer.
Did you feel in that moment when he asked you if you were interested in running, was it like, my colleagues think that this is, I'm of this level, and was it an authorizing type of conversation? Did it have that effect on you?
No, it didn't. I'm not sure I can really answer that well. I mean, there were many aspects, and there not only had never been a woman for that position, there had never been a woman in a judicial role countywide in any position in our county. I was young at the time, and I did not have political experience. I'm not sure there's no clear answer that I can say that prompted me, where I said, yes, I can do this. I'm not sure that I ever even really thought that way. I cared very much about the issues, and I did care about just affecting positive justice, and I think that that's what drove me.
Thank you very much. And Attorney Ross, how did you get confident enough to step out of your comfort zone and take on some of these larger roles?
Everything I've done because of my family, really. My children are who inspire me to be more than what even I think I could be. I want them to know there's no limit to what you could do regardless of what society says or pressures or anything. You can achieve if you put your heart and soul into it. So for me, I mean, people have heard this story, becoming the United States Attorney was because of my third son who told me that's what I needed to do. And I said to him, why? Because I'm very happy. I was working at the National Science Foundation, Office of Inspector General, merging my love for math and science with my love for law. It was the perfect position for me. And because he said after George Floyd was murdered that if I had been the person in Minneapolis, that wouldn't have happened because I prosecuted color of law cases. And he remembered one thing that I learned about children is they listen even when you don't think they're listening, and they watch even when you don't think they're watching. And I used to come home and I would talk like Judge Wolford's father about some of the things in my day, and I would talk about really, unfortunately, bad police officers, which was at the top of my list of people who got my full undivided attention. And so he remembered that, and he remembered the prosecutions I had done to make sure, as I would say, that it wouldn't escalate to someone being severely injured or murdered, which is what happened. And so when he told me he thought I should be the United States Attorney because I would not have let that happen, because I would have prosecuted Derek Chauvin before it got to the point where he murdered Mr. Floyd, who was I to say no? Who was I to say no? If your children think that much of you and your ability, and they listen to what you say, and then they ask you to take what you say and put it into action, you must put it into action.
How old was he when you had that conversation?
I think he was 25.
So that was pretty major, the George Floyd thing, and his understanding of what your position was and the role you could have played.
I believe so, at least according to him, because I listened and here I am. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And Judge Wolford, is there a conversation or a moment that you decided or that you thought, I'm gonna try this even though it's uncomfortable?
Similar to what our other panelists have said, when I applied for this position, there'd never been a woman who'd served as a district judge in the Western District of New York. A seat was open. Senator Schumer's office was making a concerted effort to try to encourage women to apply for the position, and I received a phone call asking if I was interested in applying for the position. I never would have probably submitted an application or sought it out on my own, but receiving that phone call caused me to think about it, and it's kind of opportunity that I felt you can't turn that down, and the rest, I guess, is history. I'm sitting here now, but I would not have done that on my own. I needed that bit of encouragement to actually put my name in.
It sounds like the request carries a lot of weight too, because that was what Judge Claire was saying, is that someone even asking kind of turns a corner as well.
It does. It really does. And I try to keep that in mind in myself in this particular position now, when I think it's important whenever there are openings in any kind of position, reach out and encourage people that you think are qualified, who maybe would add some diversity to the particular position to apply, because otherwise I don't know that people always think on their own to put their name in and to seek out the particular position. I mean, I don't mean to generalize, but women may be more likely not to affirmatively, proactively seek out the positions than men. I don't know.
I'd like to ask each of you as well, how often throughout your careers that you felt like gender was very much in the room with you? Whether that your gender was in the room with you, like that when you're trying to handle a matter or address counsel or clients or anything, how often were you navigating with that in front of you? Would you like to start for us?
Sure, it's interesting. Other than when I was a young attorney, I did not feel that much once I was practicing law until I became a judge. And once I was on the bench and realizing I was the only district judge, and oftentimes the attorneys in front of me were men, and my colleagues were men. I had never been as aware of my gender, except when I first started practicing law. And that was kind of a odd experience in some ways, because at that point I'd been practicing law for over 20 years and hadn't really given it much thought. And quite frankly, as a practicing attorney, in some ways my gender was really helpful. It helped develop a lot of my friends and colleagues at that point in my career were in-house counsel, and a lot of my practice was primarily commercial civil litigation. And so I really generated quite a bit of business because of those relationships and the formation of those relationships with women who were in-house at various corporations. So, but it was I don't feel that way now. I mean, I've become much more used to it, but it was challenging when I first became a judge. I was aware of it.
So both as when you first became an attorney,
Yeah.
and then again when you crossed the next threshold
Yeah.
as a judge.
Which, interesting, I have not thought about that before, but that's very true.
Attorney Ross, how about you?
So when I was in high school, I was one of 3 women who was in the electrical technology program, and one of 3 women who graduated with that diploma. So I guess I got used to it early in life, is my point. When I was in college as an engineering student, there really weren't that many women in engineering. So again, the math classes, the science classes, I was often one of maybe a handful or less of women. When I became an attorney, I'm the top law enforcement officer for the Western District of New York, which means I'm usually the only woman in the room, often and almost always. And being a woman of color, being black, I'm usually often the only person of color in the room. And that also includes when I'm in court or when I was practicing in court, and now in meetings and, dealing with law enforcement, which is heavily male and definitely heavily white male. So I notice it all the time, and I bring it up. I think it's really important to point this out. I remember I was at a law enforcement chief meeting with chiefs from the different police departments, and I was the only woman in the room. And when they announced me, I said, and I'm the only woman in the room. And did it make them feel uncomfortable? That was not the point. I think it did. That was definitely not my purpose. My purpose was to point out what was obvious to me that I think other people might have missed. So it happens often. I feel it often. I do embrace it in a way of giving me the platform to point out women are quite capable of being police chiefs or other law enforcement opportunities or employment at the higher levels. But it's pretty much my daily experience.
All the time.
Yes.
It doesn't leave the room. And Judge Claire?
I think I was keenly aware of my gender my first year on the bench. I remember one of the sheriffs, and Judge Hanlon will appreciate this comment, was very vociferous in claiming that a family court judge needed to be a man because you needed someone who could be tough on crime with juveniles. And I remember the county attorney overhearing him in the hallway telling someone else that I wouldn't last a year. But really, after the first year or so, I forgot it. I rarely thought about my gender. I was caught up in the job, and I think that I also got past those comments, and I didn't hear them, frankly. So, no, it wasn't a factor continuing.
So, in line with the programming today and talking about women as firsts and all of these things, and the way that you guys just explained gender as it impacted you professionally, it was from the outside in. It was how people were responding to your gender. So my last question for you today is, from the inside out, have you found that being a woman in the law has been an advantage or a disadvantage, and how?
I love being a woman, and I think it's an absolute advantage. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've explained some disadvantages, but I think, I'll give you an example. I think the way a woman on the bench relates particularly to some of the parties, some of the defendants, some of the criminal defendants, is different than when a man is speaking to those defendants. I don't know this for sure, but I often think those criminal defendants are sitting there thinking it's like their mother is speaking to them, and they're very respectful by and large. And I try to, especially during sentencings, which you do a lot of that in criminal law, and I try to give some motherly speaking points to them to hopefully have some impact on them. And so I think as a woman, I'm able to do that in a way that a man just is not able to do it. And that's just one example.
That's your observation.
Yes.
The strength of it.
Yes. Yes.
Attorney Ross?
I would agree with Judge Wolford. I think being a woman in the law is an advantage, and not only dealing with defendants, which I do as well, but dealing with the victims of crime especially. It's funny what Judge Claire said about being tough, because I'm known to be, I think, fairly tough. But I could have what I call tough love, that I think is more accepted coming from women, especially with victims of crimes, their family, and sometimes the defendants themselves. And so I try to use that mixture of, I'm tough and I believe in the rule of law, and I believe in, people following the rules, and if you don't like the rules, that's okay. Then find a proper way to change them. Don't just ignore them and do what you were going to do anyway. We would have chaos in society. But my children will tell you, I am known for tough love. I expect excellence from everyone. I believe that talking to a defendant or talking to victims, I believe in rehabilitation, and I believe that being a woman, they expect that kind of nurturing side. And so coming from me as a woman, as opposed to one of my male colleagues, might seem more sincere. So I think it's an advantage.
And Judge Claire?
I so agree with what you both have said. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we dealt with in our court was abused children, and unfortunately there are some very evil people in the world who aren't interested in being good parents, but the overwhelming number of people who came to court very much desperately wanted to be good parents and didn't know how. And when you were talking, I was thinking of some of the fathers who came in. We had a program in our court where we collected books and we would give them to people on their first appearance. They're nervous, they're frightened, they see us as the enemy. And here comes a father who has 3 children at home that he's charged with abusing. And I'd hand him this book, and he'd look at me, he'd be bewildered. Why is she giving me this kiddie's book? And I'd say, sir, this book is yours to keep. The only thing you need to do is read it aloud to your children, and then when you come back, just tell me what happened. And, they'd look at you suspiciously, and they wouldn't say anything. And then they would come back, and they would just open up and tell you all these amazing, wonderful things. They were shocked to find out that when they read the book, that their children loved it and would say again, again, again. They loved the time spent cuddling on a couch or whatever. We put a slip in each book telling them that books are free at the library, and the library was telling us that people were coming and were amazed to find out they could borrow books for free. I always felt that program, in part, was successful because of what you said, that they sort of saw me as a mother or whatever who was saying, here, sit down and read with your children, and they accepted it in a way that they might have been more hostile otherwise. So yes.
And they're allowed to show their vulnerability, I think, easier sometimes in front of
Yes.
a woman.
Yeah.
Men are.
It was very interesting to me reading about all of you and all of the legends that we mentioned today. And there was a common theme of very much of giving and community service, both through professionally and privately. So it was very interesting to learn about all of you today. And thank you so much for joining our panel. And I'm going to give it back to Greg.
Yes, please join me again in thanking our wonderful panelists, Judge Judith Claire, U.S. Attorney Trini Ross, and the Honorable Elizabeth Wolford, and Kristen Liao as our moderator. Thank you all so much for joining us today to celebrate these legends. It is personal listening to these stories and trying to answer them in my own mind as well. So we appreciate you being here. We look forward to hosting you again, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.